Well, good evening. Let's try that again. Good evening. Yeah, it is good to be here. I always love an opportunity to come to Idaho, and this time my suitcase didn't love the opportunity to come to Idaho, so I would like to thank the Ross over at the mall for having one shirt that I could get to wear to come over here for this evening, and please pray that my luggage makes it. They say tonight at midnight, but they also said last night at midnight, and we'll see what happens with that. So if you see me in this tomorrow at the conference, then you know. All right. Tonight, again, this lecture series is about worldview and about clashes of worldviews. And we're seeing massive clashes of worldview in our culture. And these clashes of worldview have become clearer and clearer around issues of masculinity, femininity, manhood, womanhood, and in the relationships between men and women. We're seeing clashes over what marriage is. We're seeing clashes over, ironically, what a man is and what a woman is. We're seeing clashes over the English language and pronouns, right? So all of these things are happening, and what I want us to do, I want us to look at this from a worldview perspective. Now, when we talk about worldview, there's several ways that you can describe it. A worldview is really your underlying assumptions that you rely on in order to interpret reality. Your worldview functions like a pair of glasses. We've heard the saying, looking at the world through rose-colored glasses, right? Whatever, your glasses are, they're going to color everything that you see. That's what your worldview does. Your worldview colors everything that you see. Another metaphor we could use is your worldview is like, it's like a map. I've been riding around town today looking for clothes to wear. And it's been interesting to have the GPS, right? I'm in an unfamiliar place, and the GPS will orient you, right? You look at a landmark, and then you look at the map, and that helps orient you. Our worldview does that for us as well. Our worldview orients us. And then lastly, your worldview is like a puzzle picture. If you've ever put together a puzzle, you get the puzzle, you get the box, and there's all the pieces in the box. You open the box, you pour out all the pieces, and then what you don't do is get rid of the box, right? Because you need the box in order to determine where these pieces go, right? Especially if it's one of these big old, several thousand piece puzzles. So what you do is you pick up a piece and you look at the composition of that piece, and then you compare it to the picture on the box, right? And that box sort of helps you, the finished picture, what it's supposed to look like when it's done, helps you to determine where a given piece goes. Your worldview functions in that way. Your worldview sort of says to you, this is what things are supposed to be like. So life throws you a puzzle piece, if you will, and you look at the composition of that puzzle piece and try to determine where it fits based on your worldview. So those are some ways that we kind of get our head around what we're talking about here. It's been really interesting for me living for the last 7.5, almost 8 years in Zambia, in South Central Africa. One of the most interesting aspects of it is you never really examine your worldview until you are exposed to other worldviews. Most of us we don't think we even have a worldview, right? Things just are a certain way, right? We come to our worldviews uncritically, but when they're challenged, then all of a sudden we begin to think about our worldview. Now, there's a couple of ways that we can communicate our worldview. One way that we can communicate it is the elements of our worldview. And, depending on how you want to categorize it. There are a number of different ways you can do it, but I like to categorize it with these 5, right? Your worldview helps you determine your view of God, man, truth, knowledge, and ethics. Okay? God, man, truth, knowledge, ethics. What you believe about God. Is there a God? Is there not a God? What you believe about man. Where did man come from? What is man's purpose? What you believe about truth, right? Is truth absolute or is truth relative? What you believe about knowledge. How do we come to know things, right? And then what you believe about ethics. Again, these are the 5 main pillars, if you will, of a worldview. But tonight, what I want us to do is I want us to examine it from a different perspective. And that's from more of a meta-narrative perspective. Because another thing that your worldview does is it tells the story that explains the world. It tells a story that explains why the world is the way it is. And I want to do this by posing what I like to refer to as life's ultimate questions, and then look at a few different worldviews and the way that they answer those questions. Particularly, I want to look at how secular humanism answers those questions, how neo-Marxism answers those questions, and then how biblical Christianity would answer those questions. And I want to look at a particular biblical text here, Colossians chapter 1, in answering that and describing that. So my goal here is to help us understand where the differences lie, to help us understand why we can look at the same puzzle piece or the same map, but be seeing very different things. And that's what's going on, right? That's why there's such a clash going on in the culture at large, because we're looking at the same things. For example, in the shooting that happened in Tennessee, it was just amazing to me. I saw a piece today from MSNBC, from Joy Reid's show on MSNBC, and they were talking about, presumably, the Tennessee mass shooting at the Christian school. But the headline read, "Transgenders under siege in America." Yeah, just marinate on that for a minute. We're talking about these people, these 9-year-olds who were slaughtered at school. But when Joy Reid is discussing this issue, the headline is "Transgenders under siege in America." Okay? And by the way, under siege, that's combat talk, right? That's militaristic talk. It's mind-boggling, but this is a worldview issue. The guests that she had on, some of the things that they were choosing to say, some of the ways that they were choosing, to sort of position their arguments, it was quite amazing. But again, the difference is worldview. So let's look at that. Those 4 questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What's wrong with the world? Because something's wrong with the world. And how can what is wrong be made right? Every person who has ever lived, every person who will ever live, is going to has wrestled with these 4 questions. And your worldview has a meta-narrative. It has a story, an overarching story that helps you to answer these 4 questions. Who am I? Or who is man? Why am I here? Or why is man here? what is wrong with the world? And how can what is wrong be made right? Now, full disclosure, in order to do this in the time that we have, I'm going to paint with some broad strokes here, okay? But I think you'll get the general gist. So if we pose those questions for the secular human worldview, who am I? Well, according to secular humanism, at the end of the day, I am the result of random evolutionary processes, okay? From the goo to you by way of the zoo, right? I am the result of random evolutionary processes, okay? That's the answer to question number one. The answer to question number one is some form of an evolutionary answer, all right? Question number two, why am I here? Well, if I'm the result of random evolutionary processes, then ultimately, I'm here to do what? I'm here to consume, I'm here to enjoy, I'm here to, procreate, I'm here for those basic biological reasons, right? That's why I'm here. What's wrong with the world? Now, secular humanism usually comes down on one of two sides, and oftentimes both. What's wrong with the world? What's wrong with the world is that we are either insufficiently educated or insufficiently governed. We're either insufficiently educated or insufficiently governed, which leads you to question number four, how can what is wrong be made right? More education, more government. It's G-U-B-M-I-N-T, government, okay? And we see this, don't we? Again, I'm painting with a broad brush here. I told you that. Full disclosure, I'm painting with a broad brush here. But we see this. We see these answers played out in the culture at large. We see that, again, who we are, some kind of evolutionary answer. Why we're here, some kind of biological answer. What's wrong with the world? How do we define that? Again, we think wrongly. We're insufficiently educated, or we're governed wrongly. We're insufficiently governed. So again, we need to educate people. We need to govern people, okay? That's that one view. And we'll play around with this a little bit more, but for now, let's look at the next one. The neo-Marxist worldview. And I choose the neo-Marxist worldview because really in our culture, we've had this massive shift to where now the predominant assumptions from which people are operating are these neo-Marxist assumptions, not necessarily classical Marxist assumptions, but more neo-Marxist assumptions. Classical Marxist assumptions, more economic assumptions, right? Naturalistic materialism as well, but the separation between the haves and the have-nots, the bourgeois and the proletariat, those who control the means of production, those who don't. But in cultural Marxism, it's different than that. We have this whole oppressor-oppressed paradigm, this idea of a hegemonic power. So in the neo-Marxist idea, who am I? I am an intersectional representation of the various groups to which I belong. I am an intersectional representation of the various groups to which I belong, okay? That's the cultural Marxist answer. That's the neo-Marxist answer. Again, underneath that is this same evolutionary idea. But at the end of the day, I am a representative of the various intersectional groups to which I belong. I'm a representative of the various constituencies that I represent, okay? And we hear this all the time, right? We hear this in politics all the time. How's he or she doing with this group of people? How's he or she doing with that group of people, right? Not who is this person, not, what are their positions, not what's the merit of their positions. How's their messaging doing with this intersectional group? How's their messaging doing with that intersectional group? And then we judge people not on the merit of their arguments or their positions or their track record, but we tend to measure them based on the merit of the various intersectional groups with whom they identify or who identify with them. So if this candidate is popular with this intersectional group that we've deemed evil, white, male, cisgendered, heterosexual, native-born, able-bodied, right, on down to Christian, right, at the end of that, right? If you're doing with those good with those people, you're doing good with the oppressor group. And if the oppressor group likes you, doesn't matter what's coming out of your mouth, right? The oppressor group likes you, then that means you're advancing the hegemonic oppressive power. You're a bad person because they like you, okay? So why am I here? Well, I am here to participate in this power struggle. If I am part of the oppressive group, then I am here to oppress people unless and until I'm made to stop oppressing people. If I'm part of one of the oppressed groups, then I am here to fight the power of the oppressor, right? And to somehow get the oppressor to cede power by force if necessary, and it's always necessary. Amen? Because according to my worldview, the oppressor will never cede power voluntarily, okay? What is wrong with the world? Well, what is wrong with the world is that the hegemonic oppressors are in power. That's how we explain everything that's wrong. We define wrong by disparity. So if there's any kind of disparity, by the way, you got to be really careful with disparity too, because it's disparities that we don't like, right? The neo-Marxists will say that they have a problem with disparities, but they don't mean that. What they mean is we have a problem with disparities that we don't like. And particularly, we have a problem with disparities until they don't fit our narrative, okay? So if there's a disparity in incarceration, that fits our worldview, that fits our narrative, we press that. If there's a disparity of more black people in the NBA, NBA is like 70% plus, NFL 60% plus, that's a disparity, but we don't talk about that. Those disparities are not evil. Other disparities are evil. If there's a disparity with, women in a particular career, STEM, that's oppression. That's oppression. More women in college than men, stop talking about that. Not as many women digging ditches or picking up trash, hush your mouth. Okay? So again, we're selective about the disparities, okay? But the problem, what's wrong with the world? It's the hegemonic oppression. How can what is wrong be made right? The oppressor has to be forced to cede his power to those who are oppressed. And when that happens, it will usher in utopia. Just don't read Animal Farm. Just don't read Animal Farm, right? It won't happen like that. It won't happen like that. Because once the oppressor is gone, those oppressed groups will never, ever oppress one another. Okay, so those are those answers. Again, broad brush, but remember the questions. Who am I? Why am I here? What is wrong with the world? How can what is wrong be made right? But how does a biblical worldview answer these questions? That's the worldview that I'm here to represent. So that's what I really want to give my time to For those of you who have a Bible, if you want to look on the Bible, if you got the Bible on your electronic device, like me, I have my Bible on my electronic device up here. It's in the book of Colossians. Colossians chapter number 1. Colossians chapter 1. Again, answer these questions. And as I answer these questions, here's what I want you to understand from me. I want you to understand why it is that this is the worldview that I've settled on. Why this is my answer. And I know you're probably like, well, you settle on that one because you were raised in that one. Well, actually, I wasn't. I was raised in South Central Los Angeles, California, by a single teenage Buddhist mother. I never heard the gospel till my freshman year in university. So this was not the worldview with which I was raised. Not by a long shot. Okay? Not by a long shot. All right? And we can talk about that a little bit more later, but for now, let's just get into that. I just want to get that out there, okay? For anyone who's going to have a hard time hearing what I'm saying because of some assumptions that you're making about me and the various intersectional groups to which I may or may not belong. All right. First question, who am I? Look at verse 15. Colossians 1:15. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. By the way, the he there is Christ. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. How does a biblical worldview answer that first question? Who am I? Here's the answer. I am the crowning glory of the creation of God.